Most people don't ruin their 40s because they fail. They ruin it by staying too silent, too loyal, and too afraid to admit the life they built no longer fits. Stay with me. This might feel like the most honest conversation you've had all year. You hit your 40s, and something shifts, not always dramatically. Sometimes it's subtle, almost invisible, like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it at first, until one day you're stuck, and you can't remember the last time you felt momentum. You wake up, you check your phone, you drink the coffee, you go to work, you smile, you parent, you partner, you answer emails, you run errands, you do what needs to be done, and you tell people, with a tone that says, "Don't ask more, I'm fine." But inside, there's a throb, a flatness, a strange, uncomfortable sense of numb. You're not falling apart, you're just not fully alive. And that's the first reason why most people waste their 40s. They confuse functional with fulfilled. Let's be clear. Your 40s aren't the time most people fall. They're the years when most people fade. They blend in. They become reliable, predictable, safe. And they stop listening to the quiet voice inside that says, "This life looks good, but it doesn't feel right anymore." Take Olivia, for example. She's 44, 2 kids, husband, director of marketing. She has a good job, a good house, a good life. But she told me over lunch, "If one more person tells me I should be grateful, I think I'll scream. Because I am grateful, but I'm also dying inside." She went on, "No one tells you how lonely it feels to have everything you worked for, and still not recognize yourself." That's what happens in your 40s. You realize that everything you chased in your 20s and 30s, the titles, the marriage, the house, the image, didn't deliver the feeling you thought it would. So you smile and pretend. You overschedule. You scroll. You stay busy. And most dangerously, you stay quiet. Because it's easier to maintain the story than to admit you're ready to rewrite it. But here's the thing. Silence is not peace. Stillness is not safety. And your 40s were not designed to be a holding pattern. They were meant to be the decade you wake up, where you stop trying to prove yourself and start learning how to return to yourself. But most people miss it. Why? Because they're afraid of 3 things: looking ungrateful, looking unstable, looking selfish. So instead, they overfunction, they overcommit, they overgive, and they slowly vanish from their own life. Let's name what no one says. Most people in their 40s are quietly burnt out. They crave change but don't know where to begin. They live with the pressure of being stable, while silently craving permission to fall apart and rebuild. But life isn't asking you to collapse. It's asking you to wake up. Your 40s are not a dead end. They're a doorway. And in the next part, we'll talk about the biggest myths that keep people stuck, including the lie that you're too old to change. You hit your 40s, and something strange happens. People stop asking about your dreams. They ask about your retirement account, your cholesterol, your kids' grades, your next vacation, your productivity. It's like the world assumes you've already figured it all out, or at least should have. But what if you haven't? What if the person you were becoming at 25 no longer fits the life you built at 45? What if the version of success you spent decades chasing turns out to be someone else's dream? Here's the problem. By the time most people hit midlife, they've gotten so good at being stable that they forget how to be alive. And it's not their fault. They're stuck inside a set of myths, dangerous cultural stories, that keep them playing small, shrinking, and apologizing for wanting more. So let's break them down. Myth number 1. You should be grateful, not restless. Let's start with this one. It sounds noble. Be grateful. Appreciate what you have. Don't complain. And gratitude is beautiful. when it's honest. But sometimes what we call gratitude is actually emotional gaslighting. We use it to silence the part of us that's not okay. I shouldn't want more. People have it worse. At least I have a job/partner/roof over my head. But here's the truth. You can be grateful and want more. You can appreciate your life and outgrow it. You can love your family and feel like you're losing yourself. One doesn't cancel the other. And in your 40s, restlessness isn't always selfish. Sometimes it's sacred. It's your soul knocking gently, asking, "Is this still true for you?" Ignoring that voice isn't maturity. It's self-abandonment dressed as responsibility. Myth number 2. You're too old to change. Ah, yes, the classic. You've already chosen your career. You've already built the house. You've already invested 15 years in this job. You've already raised kids this way. So why change now? Here's why. Because you're still alive. And as long as you are breathing, growing is not optional. It's natural. Let me say this clearly. You are not too old to start again. You are not too old to choose differently. You are not too old to send that made sense back then, but it doesn't feel right now. The only people who say it's too late to change are the ones too afraid to admit they want to. Myth number 3. Stability is the goal. This one's sneaky. Stability is sold as the finish line. Get the job. Keep the marriage. Stay in the house. Save the money. Protect the reputation. But here's the cost no one talks about. When stable becomes your identity, you stop asking what makes you come alive. You trade vitality for predictability, joy for convenience, truth for comfort. Now don't get me wrong, stability can be beautiful, but if it's built on a life you've outgrown, it becomes a trap. And if your body feels safe but your spirit feels suffocated, that's not stability. That's spiritual stagnation. You didn't come this far just to hold still. Myth number 4. It's too risky to disrupt what you've built. This one hits deep, especially for high-functioning people. You spent decades building this life. The career, the image, the home, the relationships, the trust. And now you're feeling the pull to pivot? To question it all? To walk away, or maybe just slow down? That feels terrifying, because the world applauds your consistency. They expect you to keep showing up as the same person you've always been. But no one tells you that evolution looks like inconsistency from the outside. What they call flaky might actually be you learning how to stop betraying yourself. What they call midlife crisis might be your first midlife honesty. Sometimes risking what you've built is the only way to find what you were born for. Myth number 5. This is just a phase. It will pass. Yes, some things are phases. Your kid's obsession with Minecraft, your partner's sourdough starter, your dog barking at shadows. But the feeling that your life no longer fits, that's not a phase. That's a wake-up call. And most people hit snooze. They tell themselves, maybe next year, once the kids are older, after the mortgage is paid off, when I turn 50. But every time you postpone the truth, you prolong the ache. You don't grow out of misalignment. You wake up from it. And when you do, don't ignore it. Honor it. Because your restlessness? That's a compass. Let me say this. The reason most people waste their 40s is not because they're weak, or lazy, or broken. It's because they keep trying to feel good in a life they've outgrown. And until you question the myths that hold you hostage, you'll keep performing a version of life that no longer reflects who you really are. Let's end this part with a reframe. If you're in your 40s and feeling like something's off, you want more, you feel flat, tired, or invisible, you wonder if this is really all there is, then you're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're not broken. You're being called, not to destroy everything, but to redefine it, with honesty and on your terms. Because your 40s weren't meant for pretending. They were meant for permission, to finally live the way you were designed to. Let's talk about a moment, a quiet moment that happens to almost everyone in their 40s. No fanfare, no lightning bolt, just a realization. You're sitting in your car, or brushing your teeth, or waiting for a Zoom meeting to load, and suddenly you feel it. I can't do this much longer. You don't scream it. You don't even say it out loud. But it lands. Heavy. Real. Maybe it's your job, your marriage, your schedule, your silence, your mask. You don't know how much longer you can hold it all up. But you also don't know how to not hold it up. So you tell yourself, I'll just ride it out. It's probably just a rough patch. Everyone feels like this, right? And in that moment, you make a decision. It doesn't look dangerous. It looks responsible, mature, stable, smart. But it's the decision that quietly steals your next decade. You choose to stay the same, even though everything inside you is begging you to grow. Let's call it what it is. Emotional resignation. It's not depression, not burnout, not hopelessness. It's a quiet surrender. You stop dreaming, you stop trying, you stop hoping, you start saying things like, this is just how it is now. I should be grateful. Maybe I just need to lower my expectations. You shrink, gently, slowly, quietly, but it's still shrinking, and here's the tragedy. You become so good at functioning inside a life you no longer feel connected to, that no one notices you're fading. You still show up, still make the calls, still make the dinner, still hit the deadlines, still laugh at the right moments. But your spark? It's flickering, and no one can see it but you. So you think, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe this is just midlife. But what if it's not just midlife? What if it's your soul calling time out, not to punish you, but to reintroduce you to you? Let me tell you about Nate. Nate was 46, owned a gym, married 20 years, 2 kids, solid income. From the outside, he was that guy, disciplined, dependable, steady. But one night, after a normal dinner, he was taking out the trash when he suddenly sat down on the curb and cried. Not a loud sob, just quiet tears he couldn't explain. He told me later, I didn't want to end my life, but I didn't know how to keep living this one. So he did what most people do. He pushed it down, got up, went back inside, watched Netflix, went to bed, and for a while, it worked. Until it didn't. 6 months later, he started waking up at 3 a.m. Not from nightmares, from numbness. He wasn't in danger. He wasn't in crisis. He was in quiet self-erasure. And that's the most dangerous place to be. Because here's what most people don't realize. You don't need to be falling apart to be out of alignment. You just need to stop feeling anything. And in your 40s, that's easy to do. You've got responsibilities. People count on you. You've got a mortgage, a routine, a reputation, and the thought of shaking any of it feels selfish, maybe even reckless. So you bargain. I'll stick it out until the kids are older. I'll revisit this after the next bonus. I'll wait until things settle down. But they don't settle. They calcify. They harden into a life you no longer recognize. And 10 years later, you wake up in your 50s and wonder, what did I just trade my prime years for? Let's pause here. This isn't about blowing up your life. This isn't about quitting your job or leaving your relationship or moving to Bali. This is about not settling for numb. This is about recognizing the moment you start shrinking and refusing to let that become your norm. Because the most dangerous decision isn't staying in the wrong place. It's believing you don't have the right to leave it. It's telling yourself, I can handle this. Instead of asking, is this even mine to carry anymore? Let me tell you about Lena. Lena was 43, therapist, mother, highly respected in her community. But every night, she'd stay up after her kids went to bed and watch home renovation shows, not for design inspiration, but because deep down, she wanted to renovate her own life. She said, "I'm great at helping other people build their lives. I just forgot how to live mine." It wasn't about failure, it was about fatigue. Fatigue from being functional in a story that no longer felt true. So what did she do? She started small. One morning a week, she sat in a coffee shop and wrote, just for herself. No clients, no kids, no agenda, just breath and space. 6 months later, she had the start of a book. A year later, she stepped back from private practice. Now, she's a writer, a coach, and still a mom. But finally also a woman who remembers who she is. She didn't blow it all up. She just stopped lying to herself about what she really wanted. So if you're in your 40s and wondering, is it selfish to want something different? Am I ungrateful for feeling this way? Do I really have to choose between comfort and aliveness? Let me answer you plainly. No, you're not selfish. You're not ungrateful. And no, you don't have to choose. You just have to stop making the one decision that robs you of your power. The decision to stay silent in the face of your truth. Because that one choice, it doesn't just waste your 40s, it steals your permission to live. So here's your invitation. Before you choose to stay, ask yourself, am I staying because it fits me? Or am I staying because I'm afraid of what happens if I leave? Before you choose to push it down, ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to teach me? What would I want if I weren't afraid of losing what I've built? Because that fear isn't weakness. It's the doorway. And what's on the other side? Not chaos, not regret, but clarity. But only if you're willing to open it. Let's take a breath. We've talked about the ways most people waste their 40s. The myths that keep them stuck. The dangerous decision to stay silent. The ache of pretending a life still fits when your soul knows better. Now let's talk about something different. Let's talk about what your 40s are actually for. Because here's the truth. Your 40s are not a decline. They are a doorway. A season not of endings, but of becoming. And while the world tells you to settle, to stabilize, to shrink politely into your roles, your 40s whisper something else. Come home to yourself. You see, your 20s are about proving. Your 30s are about building. But your 40s are about refining. Letting go of everything that looked good but never felt right. Distilling your life down to what actually matters. Making peace with the truth of who you are, without apology or performance. This is the decade where you stop living someone else's dream and start waking up to your own. But only if you're brave enough to answer the call. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah spent her 20s climbing, her 30s performing, her early 40s pretending. But one day, after yet another board meeting that felt like soul erosion, she closed her laptop, walked into the bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror, and asked, "Is this who you came here to be?" And the answer was silent, but clear. She didn't rage. She didn't scream. She simply started to listen. 6 months later, she left her executive position, not to escape, but to return, to herself, to a version of her that hadn't been heard since college, the artist, the writer, the woman who wanted to feel more than she wanted to impress. Today, she doesn't make 6 figures, not yet. But she told me, for the first time in my life, my insides and outsides match. That's what your 40s are for, not for growing your empire, but for growing your alignment. This decade isn't a midlife crisis, it's a midlife clarity. You start asking better questions. What have I been tolerating that I no longer want to carry? What parts of my life are built from fear instead of truth? What would it look like to live the next 40 years on my terms? These are not selfish questions. These are sacred questions. They don't destroy your life. They rebuild it, from the inside out. And here's what most people miss. The gift of your 40s is permission. Not to abandon everything, but to no longer abandon yourself. You've earned the right to choose peace over performance, simplicity over proving, depth over speed. You've learned enough about how the world works. Now it's time to learn how you work. And that means listening to the small voice you've ignored for too long. The one that says, I don't want to hustle anymore. I want to feel proud of who I am when no one is watching. I want to be around people who make me feel seen, not just useful. Let me ask you something. What if your 40s are not the start of decline, but the start of depth? What if the life you built, the career, the family, the identity, was just the training ground for the real life you're about to build? And what if everything you've been through, the failures, the shifts, the losses, the burnouts, weren't signs that something's wrong, but signs that something true is finally ready to emerge? You're not late. You're not stuck. You're not too tired. You're ripe, and your life is waiting for your full participation. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus was 49, owned a digital agency, married, 2 adult kids, still lifting weights, still making money, still showing up. But he told me one day, after a quiet dinner, I feel like I've mastered the game I was never meant to play. He wasn't bitter, he was just awake. And when I asked him what he wanted, he said, I want to stop managing my life like a to-do list. I want to feel things again. I want to do work that matters. I want to come alive, not just be efficient. So what did he do? He downsized, took on fewer clients, started mentoring younger creatives, got back into playing jazz piano, something he hadn't done since he was 19. He said, this isn't about escaping responsibility. It's about finally accepting responsibility for my joy. So let me be blunt. Your 40s are not for finishing what you started. They're for starting what you were born for. This is the decade to tell the truth, to edit the story, to finally ask, what if I stopped performing the version of me that made everyone else comfortable? This is your moment, not to burn it all down, but to build something more honest, something more yours. Let's break the old model. The 20s are not your peak. The 30s are not your grind. The 40s are not your decline. The 40s are your awakening, a time to realign your life with your values, to choose intimacy over image, truth over legacy, presence over pressure. You don't have to sell everything, move to another country, change your name. You just have to stop pretending this version of life is enough when your heart knows it isn't. And you have to believe that what comes next isn't reckless, it's real. Let me end this part with a truth that most people never hear. You're allowed to want more, even if your life looks fine. You're allowed to grow past the life you built. You're allowed to stop performing your old identity. You're allowed to become someone new, even if people don't understand. Because your 40s aren't asking you to be fearless. They're asking you to be honest, and honesty is the beginning of everything real. So here we are. You've walked with me through the ache, the myths, the silence, and now you're standing at the edge. Not a breakdown, not a crisis, but a crossroads. And I want to ask you, gently but truthfully, what if today is the day you stop apologizing for wanting something more? Not more money, not more status, not more validation, but more meaning, more peace, more alignment, more you. Because let me tell you something people don't say enough. You don't need permission to begin again. You just need a moment of truth and the courage to follow it. You've spent decades showing up. For your job, for your kids, for your partner, for your parents, for expectations, for survival. And now? Now it's time to show up for yourself. Not in a selfish way, not in a reckless way, in a sacred way. You've already proven you're responsible. Now it's time to prove you're alive. Let me tell you about Raymond. Raymond was 52 when his life finally got honest. He'd done everything right. Married young, worked hard, provided well. He had a house in the suburbs, a pension plan, and a drawer full of ties he hadn't worn since 2017. But every morning, he'd sit in his car for 5 minutes before walking into the office, wishing something, anything, would interrupt the day. One Tuesday, it did. A small heart scare, not fatal, but loud enough to shake the story. He told me later, I didn't have a heart attack, but it was like my life had one. I realized I didn't hate my life, but I didn't love it either. I just obeyed it. And so he started again. He cut back to part-time, took a woodworking class, started writing letters to his daughters, told his wife the truth about how lonely he'd felt for years. He said, the scariest part wasn't the change. The scariest part was realizing I could have never changed, and no one would have noticed, except me. That's the kind of regret we don't talk about. Not the regret of mistakes, the regret of never choosing yourself at all. So I'll ask again, and this time, let it land. What would it look like to begin again without apology? Not as a comeback, not as a brand, but as a return to your values, to your voice, to the you that existed before you learned to shrink for everyone else's comfort. Your 40s are not a funeral for your youth. They're a revival of your truth. You don't need to blow up your life. You need to breathe into it, to ask what's real, to unlearn the pretending, to start small, but start honest. Because here's the secret. The moment you stop needing the old life to keep making sense is the moment the new one begins to unfold. And maybe this is the first time in years someone has looked you in the eye and said, you're not broken, you're not behind. You didn't waste your time. You outgrew the old story. And you don't owe anyone the edited version of your truth anymore. You are allowed to want more than fine. You are allowed to come alive again. You are allowed to stop shrinking. You are allowed to become someone new, even if the world still wants you to be who you were. So now what? Now we do it together. Because beginning again isn't something you do alone. You don't need another self-help guru shouting at you to crush it. You don't need more hustle. You need space. You need language. You need a community of people who are done performing too. People who understand what it feels like to quietly unravel and bravely rebuild. People who are rewriting their 40s, 50s, and beyond, not to prove anything, but to live honestly. If that's you, I want to personally invite you into this space. This channel was created for people like us, the ones who woke up in midlife and thought, there has to be more than this. And guess what? There is. Not out there, not in some new success model, but here, inside you, waiting to be claimed. So here's your next step. Subscribe to this channel, not just for the content, but for the conversation. We're building a community here of real people, asking real questions, making real shifts. You're not too late. You're just in the middle. And this middle? It might just be the most important part. Before you go, tell me this in the comments. What truth are you finally ready to admit to yourself, now that you're in your 40s? Say it, even if your voice shakes. That's how beginning again starts.